Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on October the 30th, 2016. Don't you love the stories that are coming out now? We've never had so much in the way of soap operas, really, have we, for a long, long time. And things have been defined so almost clinically as right-wing versus this strange conglomeration they call socialists, left-wing today, made up of multi-billionaires at the top and guys that fund the colour revolutions inside your own country and outside too, and seem to be able to do it with impunity. So you really have all these. It's a great novel, isn't it? It really is a good novel that's going on right now. You've got financial meltdowns just waiting to happen with all the crooks at the top. Run by the secret government, runs all sides and all parties. And meanwhile, when you look at what could be going on and what should be done about things or like that, oh no, you're going to go, you might have a war with Russia. Oh my goodness, there's suddenly been, I remember saying back in 98, I think it was, if they ever need an enemy, because they always need an arch enemy to, you see, that's what the US has always done. And other empires before it, of course, used the same technique. So they'd have to reinvent one, or else they would resurrect the Great Bear, the bad bear of the Soviet Union. And that's exactly what they're doing. They fall in the script, you see. Fall in the script. And at the same time, when the US politics is bogged down in scandal, which is... Scandal only happens when something's snuck out into the media or the public information arena that is not supposed to be there. And then too, you have to wonder if it's supposed to be there as well, because you really are dealing with the tricks of intelligence services and propaganda experts. Think about that. Whenever you read anything, always think about what's behind this and behind this and behind that. And don't drive yourself crazy, because that's how furtive and deep intelligence agencies and disinformation experts all go. Because remember, the whole idea is to capture your mind. All of you. Capture your minds in order to make you think that, oh, the world is falling. The sky's falling. And you better basically all pray to your betters, that particular breed of people above you. They've been trained to believe are above you, the intelligentsia, those who are financial wizards, always plunder you and send the money to money heaven, and then they get back in again to keep it all going. It's just astonishing, the games that they play. Same games over and over. But when they pull so many of the games and put them on the board at the same time, it shows you there's a major change that they want. Believe you me, that they want. the secret shadow government, they want, you see. That's what they want. And out of that will come the solution. And you'll be breathing, releasing. My goodness, they only crash the economy till your currency is worth half of what it was. I thought it was going to go down to maybe 10% of what it was. But at least you've got 50%. You breathe a sigh of relief. Then you'll say, well, they made a deal with Russia and we're not going to get blown up after all. And you breathe a sigh of relief. And on it goes. And that's how the big boys at the top maintain control over their system. Not what you think is the little front people they put in front of you to be your system. You think it's developed by itself. It's their system at the top. Everything you do, in fact, is authorized in your daily life and made to be that way. Till even your obedience to change the clocks, I think in a week's time or so, and go along with it, because some God decided to create this law, this kind of law that you all change at the same time. Even though very few of us farm anymore, and even the farmers don't need it, even when you have it. I mean, it's kind of pointless, isn't it? And you're trained in so many ways, even how to dress and what to wear and how to converse with other people. Today you're trained more than ever how to converse with other people, because you better be careful too, and maybe not even use the word people anymore, because everything's changing by those who control you and control your minds until you're into Brave New World in a very, very radical way, because it is definitely coupled with the Orwellian prospect of 1984. The threats always come along if you don't go along with changing how you think and how you perceive things to be. Remember, to deceive a whole planet, you first must make sure the individual adopts and adapts into the new system which you're creating for them. And they'll use the proper terminology. And just remember that the same people who brought you your capitalist side on one side and they brought you your communist side on the other, and then they gave you the purges in the communist Trotskyist side, because like to say they're Trotskyists, you see. These are the people who they had show trials to show the public that you too could be in that dock there with a sentence of death looming upon you and over you because you didn't go along with something. And you'll see the people in the dock weeping with tears after getting tortured forever and all kinds of torture. And that could be you. That could be you. Because you said something. Or you might have used old think, the way you used to talk when you would perceive things for yourself and come to a conclusion for yourself. That's not allowed anymore. I'll be touching on that later on too. We are in that system. It's the same system, mind you, that they brought in China, communist China, with the so-called cultural revolution for the youth. So they would use the youth then, who are already communist and brainwashed, to then get rid of the old think people who'd helped in the revolution, in fact, just like the Soviet Union did. They always do the same techniques, if you notice, because even though you were communist and helped to fight in the revolution, you still were tainted. Your thinking was tainted with memories of the old system that were still around inside your head, you see, and that might get spread to other people. We can't have that. This is getting used now with the way you speak and what you say, how you perceive things. Until the radical turn on everybody, it's very much like it's strange, isn't it? Or is it strange actually? Or is it the same group or movement behind it all? And that movement, of course, is the one that had the French Revolution, where eventually they were slaughtering each other with the guillotine. It truly will be interesting to see the real enforcement that is going to be forced on people. Already is, when it's under law. It's a matter of time before they start building up all the cases against people who have thought for themselves. Seriously. Look around you today. Look at the incredible amount of propaganda and indoctrination people have been subjected to at a very early age. Constant from all media, mainstream media especially. And education as well. Education is just total indoctrination today. Complete. It's not there to free the mind up to think for itself by using logic and reasoning. It's to make sure that everyone comes out completely indoctrinated. Completely indoctrinated. And with the knowledge that they better go along with everything. They know that already if they want to get on in life. Mean to be very politically correct, or else. Believe you me, it's coming down. And look at the dazed look on people's eyes today. They literally look as though they're not quite with you at any time at all. They're bombarded with data. Data is just noise. It's noise. It doesn't have to be truth or truthful news or information at all. It's just data, and they're literally loaded with it. Never mind all the movies I've watched and all the fiction that's helped to unload data into their brains as well, or download data. It's all there, and look at the end result. They look at people being beat up in real time often with all their gadgets today. It doesn't free them up. It makes it worse because they're not horrified. They're not horrified at all by what they're seeing. They soak up stuff depicting the same kind of material via the fictional media. And when they see the real thing happening, it's more of a curiosity they have, like a mild curiosity. They're not really involved in it as folk get slaughtered or bombed from the air. And they also have their own governments telling them this is a good thing, that these folks should be bombed because they're not nice people. It's amazing, isn't it, how easy the techniques are applied of propaganda to make you dislike or even feel neutral or even irrelevant regarding the people that you're seeing getting blown up or killed by their own militaries. The same technique, remember, comes home, because when that's happening abroad, with the applaud of the public, or at least even the passivity of the public, or disinterest of the public, this big eating machine will come back round to you, and you will find yourself going through something perhaps similar in your own country. Is that force behind all of this is unleashed upon you by your own governments, by silencing you. Well, what do you think silencing means? There's the ultimate silencing, isn't there? And then there's the other techniques that are used by threats, coercion. All these things are used, but ultimately they silence you. That's what silencing really means. We're in that phase today. We truly are. And believe you me, when you see what's often called the progressive left, all gleeful and feeling triumphant, and they really do, because they think they've won all these rights to condemn everybody else and decide what's right or wrong within society. They really feel that they've won something. They don't realize there's one system that runs everything from the top, and that the people who are silent about it, the multi-billionaires and trillionaires, etc., the top trilateralists, for instance, leave it all alone. Well, it's because these guys are the guys who decided this is the society they've created for you to follow. And they ain't going to lose out because of anything that you do. If anything, it'll help them control society down below them, way down below there, much, much easier. There are many ways to get propaganda across. Generally, it's done by giving you what you think are stories, like news stories, like real, truthful bits of news. But in actual fact, they take away a good half of the story, or even the 3/4 of the story, which would really inform you as to what are the movements or powers really behind something. That's the simplest way to do it. And all governments use this technique. It's amazing to me to read some of the articles that literally foster ignorance, and at the same time convince the public that obviously this must be a good thing because they keep saying it is. The average person might even parrot that back to you. Well, it's good, isn't it? But they don't know why it's good for you, because they don't know. It was like the British idea of joining the EU. It was sold as going to be a great thing. Jobs, jobs, jobs. For everybody, and wealth down the road. Never telling you that the whole intention of it was to make you poorer overall, and you'd be run by a government across the water. This entity that really is a foreign thing, it's an alien thing, because it's not a nation as such. It's not. Again, it was set up by private individuals using technocracy, the techniques of technocracy, believing the world should be run by themselves, experts, and run by, above them, the most powerful, wealthiest people on the planet. And that was also part of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and then the real, you might call them shock troops that they place into all top positions across the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all your central bank systems, having to do with trading across the planet for your nation. These are all Trilateral Commission members, and they're all part of the one private organization. And so is your intelligence service of your nation too, your top one and your foreign one. It's all part of it too. That's why do you realize that your culture was managed by the CIA, most of you out there, across Europe too? Since at least World War II finished. They gave you your culture. They altered it all. They got the private groups in to create the new culture for what was called a socialized world, which again, their masters above them would control. It's all been pretty well done. And remember too, once someone's indoctrinated even in the lower levels into this culture, that they think they're spearheading it and they're behind it all, and they're radical, it means they're full of anger, terrifying anger and hate. You can't rationalize or even have a conversation. They'll kill you. When you start putting them in power on behalf of the masters on the top, it's because the masters at the top want this dysfunctional society down below. A very obedient society. And even those who are persecuting you personally won't know that themselves. They think they're in charge. What a joke. But you've got to admit, it's rather diabolically, incredibly clever, isn't it? I'll give you an example, though, what I'm talking about, from a Canadian article. And it mentions Trudeau. I guess it's junior, since they had the senior who's dead now. Because they love dynasties, don't they? As front people, really. Takes off to sign the EU trade deal, but skies ahead aren't clear. And it's about Canada signing the CETA deal. They don't talk much about CETA. They've got all these other things on the go at the same time to distract you. And they have taught the public, most of the public, to be ignorant of all these deals and what's really behind them and what their purpose or purposes happen to be. But they talk about the CETA, as I say, that Canada initially had it turned down by Belgium. The EU Union is based there, of course, that's why it's there. And it says it was twice, it's turned down anyway. But anyway, it's been passed now. That means that it was forces in those countries that were waiting with their hands out. That's what it generally means when there's disagreements on these big agreements. Because these agreements bind you into political systems and commercial systems and economic systems. And eventually the whole purpose, just like the EU, it was to create a type of world government. Anything to do with internationalism and world government and extra-national government systems or supranational government systems was to be lauded, and that's where it is today. Marx talked about that too. And they could split the world up into three super parliaments under a world government. Each one would lead towards even more need for a world government, and that's what you're going through. And you think it's just happening by itself. It's an old plan. And it says here that the CETA is quite a deal, and it says here that Martin Schulz, the presidential equivalent to Speaker, took part. Now he wanted CETA's passage to boost his ambition to run for Germany's Chancellor next year, things like that. Everybody's got their hands out. All these careerists want their hands out. They want to be filled with cash from across the whole planet, including Canada's. And there'll be people in Canada too that will get their hands full of cash as well with dealing with all of this. But it also means that now foreign governments, plural, which are really sub-governments to the EU Parliament, will also have a say in what is done inside Canada. And again, it's lauded by the far left because they're told what to laud by, what they think is their superiors in the far left. And it's going to mean internationalism, which they think is a wonderful thing, without realizing you can have international anything, including fascism. It doesn't matter, make any difference really. It's all the same power behind it all. And it all helped go towards their whole idea. They've been told is great too, this con of sustainability to do with global warming and climate change. They actually say that too. Therefore, it's got to be a good thing, you see. And that's how it's all pushed. People don't think. It's by omission, and without telling them this is a very old idea, so over 100 years old. And They don't tell them too about all the big corporations, the CEOs or the heads of the corporations, at least the front men, who are all on board for their own particular agenda, because they're all part of the same club. They're the new feudal system, as Carl Quigley said. He was a historian for the CFR, remember? And the CEOs are all on board with all these changes because they, on behalf of all their investors at the top, the people above them, the real people who rule the world, the really big, high characters, want it this way to benefit themselves. Therefore, it's got to be a great thing, you see. These things have been thought out by your superiors. And lots in academia are on board with it too. And your trilaterals, as I said before, there's about 100 in the States and Canada, I think, and 100 in the European Union, and another 100 in the Far East. This was the whole idea of the setting up of this system. They would really run on behalf of their big organization. They'd really run governments across the world and the financial systems across the world. And all the money that they would tax off of you would go through their own banks, of course, at the top, international ones. And they would be in charge of us totally. And they would use the far left to use their indoctrination to change us, destroy the family unit, all of these things. And because then they'd have no opposition left to stand up to it all. That's all part of it. That's not my opinion either. But they won't mention that in here, these articles. In fact, you get very little out of it at all. You really will get very little out of it. It doesn't tell you the history behind all of this. The private organizations at the top that run all this, and that create the whole idea of it, and the people involved, or the trilaterals, won't mention them at all. And that's how you're brainwashed. That somehow it's some natural thing just evolving by itself, and it must be good. And it's fantastic, really, when you look at what's happened across the whole of Europe. And how your same press can ignore what happens across the whole of Europe. Another thing, too, is nothing in the media, nothing in the press is independent. It truly is. If something is independent in the press, someone's head is going to roll. Because the press is a technique of controlling the minds of the people. Always has been. That's why it's authorized and licensed. And that's why they go to top meetings and top political meetings. And they actually, remember Rockefeller himself, after one of the global meetings, and the Bilderberg meeting too, he said himself that he thanked the press for keeping what they've been up to for years, including their agenda, secret from the public. That's what he told the reporters, who were also working on behalf of their bosses, who are members of the big private organization that runs the world. Anyway, several top journalists and TV news anchors RSVP'd, yes, to attend a private off-the-record gathering in New York, home of Joel Benenson, the chief campaign strategist for Hillary Clinton, 2 days before she announced her candidacy in 2015, according to emails, WikiLeaks, published from John Podesta's purported accounts. The guest list for an earlier event at the home of John Podesta was limited to reporters who were expected to cover Clinton on the campaign trail. The email thread starts with Jesse Ferguson, the campaign's deputy national press secretary and senior spokesman, describing the venues and targets audience of each gathering. We wanted to make sure everyone on this email had the latest information on the 2 upcoming dinners with reporters. Both are off the record. And it gives you a rundown of Thursday night, Friday night, and all the rest. Who's coming, blah, blah. Cocktails and dinners with John Podesta. And they give you all the top characters from the ABC News, from CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and NBC. These are all the folk who are expected to be on board. And no doubt, too, they'll feel out the characters to make sure they personally get some kind of reward, too, apart from just their booze and their dinner at these kind of meals. That's how the world really works, isn't it? Isn't it? It's so true, isn't it? And they'll play the game. They're told to play the game, or they mind you, if they're reporters and they don't play the game, they're fired the next day, or worse. Also, this is interesting. I've said there's only one system, and I've given the talks over the years about this one system. And how even with the neoconservatives who came out with the New American Century plan to bomb across the entire Middle East and into Africa, because that was part of their plan too, is to create this global governance idea and dominate it all for themselves at the top financially by stealing the resources of all the countries that they massacre. That's an old idea, but they still do it today, you see. It works awfully well. And you'll find that article that I mentioned before, be in the archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, where you'll find that Rumsfeld, Donald Rumsfeld, thanked Obama when Obama took over with what folk thought was a left socialist group for continuing the same agenda. Well, naturally they continue because they're all working for the same bosses at the top. That's why it's continued. That's why it's continued. Anyway, here's some more proof here. It says, Citigroup chose Obama's 2008 cabinet. WikiLeaks document reveals. It says, 1 month before the presidential election of 2008, the giant Wall Street bank Citigroup submitted to the Obama campaign a list of its preferred candidates for cabinet positions in an Obama administration. So here you have a big Wall Street bank submitting who they want to get put in. The list corresponds almost exactly to the eventual composition of Barack Obama's cabinet. The memorandum revealed by WikiLeaks in a recent document released from the email account of John Podesta, who currently serves as Hillary Clinton's campaign chair, was written by Michael Froman, who was then an executive with Citigroup and currently serves as the U.S. trade representative. The email is dated 6th of October 2008 and bears as subject line, lists. It went to Podesta a month before he was named chairman of President-elect Obama's transition team. The email was sent at the height of the financial meltdown that erupted after the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers September the 15th. Even as Citigroup and its Wall Street counterparts were dragging the US and world economy into its deepest crisis since the 1930s, there remained, as his email shows, the real power behind the facade of American democracy and its electoral process. Froman's list proved remarkably prescient. As it proposed, Robert Gates, a Bush holdover, became Secretary of Defense. Eric Holder became Attorney General. Janet Napolitano, Secretary of Homeland Security. Rahm Emanuel, White House Chief of Staff. Susan Rice, United Nations Ambassador. Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education. Kathleen Sebelius, Secretary of Health and Human Services. Peter Orszag, Head of the Office of Management and Budget. Eric Shinseki, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and Melody Barnes, Chief of the Domestic Policy Council. For the highly sensitive position of Secretary of the Treasury, 3 possibilities were presented: Robert Rubin and Rubin's close disciples, Lorne Summers and Timothy Geithner. Obama chose Geithner, then President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Geithner, along with the Bush Treasury Secretary and former Goldman Sachs CEO Henry Paulson and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, had played the leading role in organizing the Wall Street bailout. Rubin had served as Treasury Secretary in the Bill Clinton administration from 1995 until 1999, when he was succeeded by Summers. In that capacity, Rubin and Summers oversaw the dismantling of the Glass-Steagall Act from 1933, that was in, which had imposed a legal wall separating commercial banking from investment banking. Immediately after leaving Treasury, Rubin became a top executive at Citigroup, remaining there until 2009. A notable aspect of the Froman memo is its use of identity politics, which seems to be all the rage these days, eh? Among the Citigroup executive lists of proposed hires to Podesta were a diversity list, including African American, Latino and Asian American candidates, broken down by cabinet deputy and under deputy assistant level, in Froman's words, and a similar document on women. Froman also took diversity into account for his White House cabinet list, probability weighting the likelihood for appointing a diverse candidate for each position. Canada's just done the same, actually. This list concluded with a table breaking down the 31 assignments by race and gender. Citigroup's recommendations came just 3 days after the then President George W. Bush signed into law the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which allocated $700 billion in taxpayer money to rescue the largest Wall Street banks. The single biggest beneficiary was Citigroup, isn't that coincidence, which was given $45 billion in cash in the form of government stock purchase, plus a $306 billion government guarantee to back up its worthless mortgage-related assets. Then presidential candidate Obama played a critical political role in shepherding the massively unpopular bank bailout through Congress. The September financial crash convinced the sections of the US corporate financial elite that the Democratic candidate of hope and change would be better positioned to contain popular opposition to the bailout than his Republican rival, Senator John McCain of Arizona. As President Obama would not only funnel trillions of dollars to the banks, he saw to it that not a single leading Wall Street executive faced prosecution for the orgy of speculation and swindling that led to the financial collapse and Great Recession, and he personally intervened to block legislation capping executive pay at bailed-out firms. The same furtive and corrupt process is underway in relation to Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump administration. Froman's email is one of many thousands released by WikiLeaks from the account of Podesta. These communications, such as the Froman email, which exposed who really rules America, it doesn't really show who really, just some of them, gives you clues, have been virtually ignored by the media. The pro-democracy party called New Republic called attention to an article published Friday, but the story has received little, if any, further coverage. That actually came initially from the World Socialist website. You can read everything, you understand, even though the socialists don't know themselves what they're supposed to be. Because it's like everything else now, they keep changing what it really does. Like, once you have big groups of people, you give them a few slogans, and they'll all think they're all comrades together. And then gradually change until they're actually doing your bidding from the very, very top. And they'll never know what's at the top. When you join big groups, you lose your own thought process. That's why they use it. That's why they create big groups. They've always done this. Now, I'm also going to put up what's at stake in the election, Paul Craig Roberts. He has some good articles. It says here they're the prostitutes who control America's minds. This is from a long experience in journalism. I know the American public is not very sharp. That part's true, but then no public is sharp if it's brought up to be incredibly well entertained, which means distracted and indoctrinated. Incredibly well indoctrinated through education as well, even very basic stuff from education. And again, brought and raised to be very naive, believing that everything that's there when they're born and they're raised must be normal because it's there. It's that simple, isn't it? Anyway, he says they're not very sharp. Nevertheless, it's difficult for me to believe that Americans whose jobs, careers, and the same for their children and grandchildren have been sold out by the elites who Hillary represents would actually vote for her. It makes no sense. If this were the case, how did Trump get the Republican nomination despite the vicious prostitute campaign against him? It seems obvious that the majority of Americans who have been suffering terribly at the hands of the 1% who own Hillary lock, stock and barrel will not vote for the people who've ruined their lives and the lives of their children and grandchildren. Furthermore, if Trump's election is impossible, as the prostitutes tell us, Hillary's win is 93% certain, according to the latest prostitute pronouncement. The vicious 24/7 attacks on Trump would be pointless, wouldn't they? Why the constant frenetic vicious attacks on a person who has no chance? There are reports that a company associated with Hillary backer George Soros is supplying the voting machines to 16 states, including the states that determine election outcomes. So I don't know that these reports are correct. However, I do know for a fact that the oligarch interests that rule America are opposed to Trump being elected president for the simple reason that they are unsure that they would be able to control him. And that's more to the point when you really understand there's only one system running. Not just the US or Canada, but the world. And its tricks are awfully good to make you think there are multiple groups or diversities of politics. Because they always put in their heads of all the different groups which they create. Just like they put in Obama. It says, it's hard to believe that dispossessed Americans will vote for Hillary, the representative of those who have dispossessed them. When Trump says he will re-empower the dispossessed, Hillary has denigrated ordinary Americans who, she says, she's so removed from by her wealth that she doesn't even know who they are. Clearly, Hillary paid $675,000 by Goldman Sachs for 3 20-minute speeches is not a representative of the people. She represents the 1% whose policies have flushed the prospects of ordinary Americans down the toilet. By the way, if you don't know it, I think Bill is one of the members of the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission run the world right now. They set up your union through the Council on Foreign Relations, which is all part of the one organization, really. But they set up the Trilaterals along with the CFR, which is the main general body of them all. The Trilaterals are pulled out of them and given a higher agenda of being that, shall I say, shock troops. But Bill is one of them. They'll never turn on their own because they run the world today. They're on the socialist parties too at the top. They're on the banking systems that we're all into. They're on the IMF. They're on the central banks. They appoint the technocrats into, remember, when the bank collapses in Greece and in Italy, they appointed their own boys straight in. No votes. And they were both trilateral members. And you think your vote matters right now? The only vote that matters is if you're a true vote to vote out the system that already rules you. And not be stupid enough to vote on the first one that presents itself as its arch enemy. Because that'll be theirs too. What is really disturbing is the pretense that the prostitute scum that Trump's lewd admiration for female charms is deemed more important than the prospect of nuclear war. At no time during the presidential primaries or during the current presidential campaign has been mentioned that Russia is being assaulted daily by propaganda, which is stepping up even more and more and more as Hillary is being exposed. And threatened by military build-ups and being convinced that the United States and its European vassals are planning an attack. A threatened Russia made insecure by inexplicable hostility and Western propaganda is a danger manufactured by the neoconservative supporters of Hillary Clinton. If the American people are really so unbelievably stupid that they think lewd remarks about women are more important than avoiding nuclear war, the American people are too stupid to exist. Now here's a point here too. It isn't just American people. I mean, Canada's press has been completely the same as the US press, with all their pictures of Donald Trump on the front pages of magazines. Now, oh, evil! He's the devil. He's everything. And you go on and say they will deserve the mushroom clouds that will wipe them and everyone else off the face of the earth. And let's be honest here, the tricks have been played in this particular election are standard. They're standard. They always build up, well, you're not a really trustworthy person. You fancy maybe even the opposite sex. Maybe that's maybe bad now too. I don't know. But the thing is, people who complain, who fall for all this stuff, if they fall at all, I really don't think anybody can fall for this rubbish anymore. They're watching pure, it's really prostitution taking place and all their internet sites and everything else, but they're going to be shocked about it. Come off it. Oh. And Donald Trump is the only candidate in the primaries of the general election who has said that he sees no point in conflict with Russia when Putin has shown nothing but desire to work things out to mutual advantage. In contrast, Hillary has declared the thrice-elected president of Russia to be the new Hitler and has threatened Russia with military action. Hillary talks open about regime change in Russia. Surely in a free media, at least one person in the print and TV media would raise this most important of all points, but where have you seen it? Well, you see, you won't see it because it's all part of one system. Obviously, to control the system on behalf of those who already rule the world, you have to make sure that all the media is your own and everybody's on board with you. Right down to having wars start, if need be, to truly divert the public off into the next terrifying phase of we all must come together as one, which will be their benefit actually, because that's what they want, isn't it? A world governance. and the right written into everything to totally indoctrinate the children into a complete system under the pretense that it will never happen again if they get that right given to them. There's a reason for everything that happens, and it's discussed by countless think tanks way up there. Now here's an article 2. NATO squares up to Putin. As Russia beefs up its military might on Europe's border, the West responds with the biggest show of force since the Cold War. Actually, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. And it says armoured forces, including 800 UK troops, was sent to Estonia for 6-month deployment next May. I'll put up tonight a link to a documentary by, he's actually the brother of the famous or infamous Christopher Hitchens, and Peter Hitchens is his name. He lived in Russia for a couple of years, and he was actually a Marxist at one point and completely turned against it, but he tells you the truth about what's happening with that fleet that's been sent to actually went past through the channel, actually, which is international waters. But what would you do if you were threatened with, even as a sideline, just to get the heat off of somebody or a bunch of people inside the US? But I'll put this up to show you how they give you the fear thing, which is standard technique. I can remember when Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the Great Satan. Then they changed it again, and I think then they hit I think it was Bill Clinton was in Milosevic in Serbia. Oh, he became the Great Satan, and then they changed it to Grenada, a little place of Grenada. That became the Great Satan as well. It's a standard CIA tactic run by those who create your opinions on things by using the Bernays techniques, which I'll touch on in a little while. In fact, now here is inside the invisible government, war, propaganda, Clinton and Trump. And this is from John Pilger. This is the American journalist Edward Bernays is often described as the man who invented modern propaganda. But he didn't invent it. The nephew of Sigmund Freud, there's a reason that is all in the same family, you might say, who had studied human nature intensely, and definitely there was an agenda behind it all, was Bernays, who coined the term public relations as a euphemism for spin and its deceptions, for propaganda, for fooling people, including entire nations. In 1929, he persuaded feminists to promote cigarettes for women by smoking in an Easter parade, behaviour then considered outlandish. One feminist, Ruth Booth, declared women light another torch for freedom, fight another sex taboo. Still goes on today, doesn't it? The same techniques. And they paid a lot of money and put it into the top magazines of the day. And they got women who were all dressed up to be the avant-garde of the new, intelligent, forceful woman. Wealthy too, by the way. Bernays' influence extended far beyond advertising. His greatest success was his role in convincing the American public to join the slaughter of the First World War. I should mention at this point too, I don't think it mentions it here in this article, but Bernays worked inside a club that wanted World War I. And one of the characters he was involved with was Mandel House, that run President Wilson, the US President Woodrow Wilson. He ran him. He was the boss. So there was definitely a cabal here involved in, again, planning the world and this wars and outcomes that had already planned how to get this and this and this. Well, we need a war in order to make this happen. And then, by the way, Bernays, a very young guy at the time, was taken over by Wilson on the commission for the League of Nations after the World War I. Not bad doing. Let's get the war started, convince the public and the American people to go and fight it by creating a great Satan, of course. And then we, our cabal, will be in charge of this system afterwards too. And the public will never know that there was a different reason for it all in the first place. You got to remember too that Bernays went on for through a few different presidents and brought in to advise them on changing and, again, controlling the minds of the people. Anyways, Bernays' influence extended far beyond advertising, and the secret, he said, was engineering the consent of people. You talk about World War I. Engineering the consent of people in order to control and regiment them according to our will without their knowing about it. You think this tampering with the mind and psychology is a new thing? Not at all. Not at all. No. Read that part again, because people have a very limited ability today. And they truly have. It's dropping all the time. All the surveys MIT show it, which means it's working. All their indoctrination and dumping of useless data on the people's minds, their attention span is dropping. Anyway, it says the secret, he said, was engineering the consent of people in order to control and regiment them. Think about that. Control and regiment them. Same thing with all the different parties and groups and etc. They think they're all right. They don't have no idea they're being regimented and controlled by people way above them who have a completely different agenda. According to our will and without their knowing about it. That's a beautiful part, isn't it? You got to admit it. You got to admit it. He described this as the true ruling power in our society and called it an invisible government. Now, I did a whole series of these talks years ago on the radio, and you'll find them in the archive session at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Remember, too, you get Cutting Through the Matrix, and you get other dots as well. Make sure you copy them all in case they start pulling them off the air. You've got another one to go to. Back to the article, it says, today the invisible government has never been more powerful and less understood. In my career as a journalist and filmmaker, I've never known propaganda to insinuate our lives as it does now and go unchallenged. Imagine two cities, both are under siege by the forces of the government of that country. Both cities are occupied by fanatics who commit terrible atrocities such as beheading people. But there's a vital difference. In one siege, the government soldiers are described as liberators by Western reporters embedded with them, who enthusiastically report their battles and airstrikes. There are front-page pictures of these heroic soldiers giving these signs for victory. There is scant mention of civilian casualties. In the second city in another country nearby, almost exactly the same thing is happening. Government forces are laying siege to a city controlled by the same breed of fanatics. The difference is that these fanatics are supported, supplied and armed by us, by the United States and Britain. They even have a media center that is funded by Britain and America. Another difference is that the government soldiers laying siege to this city are the bad guys, condemned for assaulting and bombing the city, which is exactly what the good soldiers do in the first city. Confusing? Not really. Such is the basic double standard that is the essence of propaganda. I'm referring, of course, to the current siege of the city of Mosul by the government forces of Iraq, who are backed by the United States and Britain, and to the siege of Aleppo by the government forces of Syria, backed by Russia. One is good and the other one is bad. That's how it's portrayed, you see. What is seldom reported is that both cities would not be occupied by fanatics and ravaged by war if Britain and the United States had not invaded Iraq in 2003. That criminal enterprise was launched on lies, strikingly similar to the propaganda that now distorts our understanding of the civil war in Syria. Without this drumbeat of propaganda dressed up as news, the monstrous ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and the rest of the jihadist gang might not exist, and the people of Syria might not be fighting for their lives today. Some may remember that in 2003, a succession of BBC reporters turning to the camera and telling us that Blair was vindicated, as Tony Blair, for what turned out to be the crime of the century. The US television networks produced the same validation for George W. Bush. Fox News brought on Henry Kissinger to fuse over Colin Powell's fabrications. Weapons of mass destruction, you see. Same year, soon after the invasion, I filmed an interview in Washington with Charles Lewis, the renowned American investigative journalist. I asked him what would have happened if the freest media in the world had seriously challenged what turned out to be crude propaganda. He replied that if journalists had done their job, there's a very, very good chance we would not have gone to war in Iraq. Remember, all these countries were on the list written in the 90s and published in the 1990s from the New American Century, the PNAC group, that they wanted taken out. And General Clark reiterated all that too on national television years later, after they'd gone to war through Iraq. There was a whole bunch of countries that they hadn't done yet. But on them were the ones that they've been going, all of them around Israel, there's no doubt about it, were on that list. And many more too in parts of Africa. In other words, had journalists done their job, they challenged and investigated the propaganda of amplifying it. Hundreds of thousands of men, women and children would be alive today. There'd be no ISIS and no siege of Aleppo or Mosul. You need money and training for this kind of thing, remember. Big money. And you need media to be on board with you for your agendas. There would have been no atrocity on the London Underground on 7th of July 2005. There would have been no flight of millions of refugees. There would have been no miserable camps. When the terrorist atrocity happened in Paris last November, President François Hollande immediately set planes to bomb Syria. And more terrorism followed, predictably the product of Hollande's bombast about France being at war and showing no mercy. That state violence and jihadist violence feed off each other is a truth that no national leader has the courage to speak. When the truth is replaced by silence, said the Soviet dissident Yevtushenko, the silence is a lie. The attack on Iraq, the attack on Libya, the attack on Syria happened because a leader in each of these countries was not a puppet of the West. The human rights record of a Saddam or a Gaddafi were irrelevant. They did not obey orders and surrender control of their country. The same fate awaited Slobodan Milosevic once he had refused to sign an agreement that demanded the occupation of Serbia and its conversion to a market economy. His people were bombed and he was prosecuted in The Hague. Independence of this kind is intolerable. You keep sending armies over for supposedly democracy and independence. Stop kidding yourselves. As WikiLeaks has revealed, it was only when the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad in 2009 rejected an oil pipeline running through his country, and that's awfully good too, because I mentioned that, it's also on CurrentRemix.com, of all the countries and the big moguls that are familiar names that owned the companies that wanted to run pipelines, oil pipelines through Syria and a few other countries as well, by the way. But anyway, running through his country from Qatar to Europe, that he was attacked. He wouldn't go along with this big international mogul plan. From that moment, the CIA planned to destroy the government of Syria with jihadist fanatics, the same fanatics currently holding the people of Mosul and eastern Aleppo hostage. Why is this not news? The former British Foreign Office official Carney Ross, who was responsible for operating sanctions against Iraq, told me we would feed journalists factoids of sanitized intelligence, or we would freeze them out. That's how it worked. Journalists all know this too. If you don't go along with their agenda, you won't get pulled in to be in the loop on anything at all. Same if you go against the chosen people for elections. If you go against them, you won't get brought into the governments to be fed little bits of information on what's going to happen in the near future. You're just frozen out. That's how you do it. And that's how democracy works, for those who don't know what democracy is. The West medieval client, Saudi Arabia, to which the US and Britain sell billions of dollars worth of arms, is at present destroying Yemen, a country so poor that in the best of times half the children are malnourished. Well, that goes along with the world agenda of depopulation, doesn't it? Look on YouTube and you will see the kinds of massive bombs, our bombs, that the Saudis use against dirt poor villages and against weddings and funerals. The explosions look like small atomic bombs, and the bomb aimers in Saudi Arabia work side by side with British officers. This fact is not on the evening news. Propaganda is the most effective where consent is engineered by those with a fine education from Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Columbia, and with careers on the BBC, The Guardian, New York Times, The Washington Post, and Canada's got his ones too. These organizations are known as the liberal media. They present themselves as enlightened, progressive tribunes of the moral zeitgeist. They're anti-racist, pro-feminist, and pro-LGBT. So how can it be bad? You see, that's how everything in your head is given to you. Clever, eh? Very clever. So how could these liberal leaders in the media be wrong? Anyway, it says, and they love war. Well, they speak up for feminism, they support rapacious wars that deny the rights of countless women, including the right to life. In 2011, Libya, then a modern state, was destroyed on the pretext that Muammar Gaddafi was about to commit genocide on his own people. This was the incessant news. There was no evidence. It was a lie. In fact, Britain, Europe, and the United States wanted what they like to call regime change in Libya, the biggest oil producer in Africa. Gaddafi's influence in the continent, and above all, his independence, were intolerable. You can't have them, people going their own way, independent people, can you? Can't do it. Oh, it's evil. It's evil. Oh. Well, I'll put all these links up for you to look at for yourselves. And remember, try and remember history over the last few years at least. And maybe you won't be conned so easily again by those who give us our reality, supposedly, and who create consent. For myself, Alan Watt, in Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.